short introduction. You know that since the end of the Second World War, it's unseen that in Europe that a part of a country has been annexed by another state, as it happened to Crimea last year. And now Ukraine still continues to be threatened in its territorial integrity by pro-Russian separatist forces operating in the eastern part of Ukraine. And the question is, how has the international community to react to the violation of one of the cornerstones of international law, namely the sovereignty of a state? And especially the European Union has to ask herself what to do, how to react to this violation, and what the European Union can do for Ukraine, a country for which she has a special responsibility. The fact that Ukraine is orientating itself to the European Union, and that the citizens of Ukraine dream of a European mission, well, this led to the divide with Russia and to the present crisis. And we can also ask ourselves, why is Russia acting like this? And are all the Russians supporting this policy? We can doubt about this when we see what happened last week in Moscow with the funeral of this dissident who had been killed. But also we can ask ourselves, what does an aggressive foreign policy of a certain country tell us about the state of democracy in that state? So these are some of the questions with which our speakers will deal. And let me please introduce them now to you. Mrs. Olena Prystayko is the Executive Director of Ukrainian think tank's Liaison office.
How we see it, that this appeasement of the aggressor is being done on the count of the Ukrainian territory. We are not saying that this is our obligation to protect our country, but we only say that protecting ourselves, we are also protecting the whole system. And it's better for you, because we don't understand, and again, I do not agree with those who say that this can be frozen, because the logic tells you that this will not be frozen. It will continue. And it's for the interest of everybody to wake up now and do something. It's another story, what can you do? Because we are living in a different world, because Russian behavior is something very new. When you have a nuclear power, member of all international platforms, including with the right of veto, who openly disrespects all the rules they have been signed to. Yes, and I do understand the difficulty of all international players we are in now. This is really difficult, but that calls for another story. We should open kind of an open international discussion using UN, Council of Europe, OEC, all different, WTO, everything. How to deal with these new challenges of this new world. And hopefully, very hopefully, that it can be done in a So what we need first, we need to close border with Russia. But we cannot do this because it is open. So I don't. My issue that the war can be stopped. If international community would be more, let's say, involved into this. And the Minsk agreement, they have not been fulfilled even 1 hour. And we most of us are kind of probably certain that they will try to continue, and the next target is Mariupol. And this city is kind of a city between this Donbass area and Crimea. And then let's think about what will happen if he will manage. It's kind of a creepy occupation, you know? And this, with every Minsk, number 1, number 2, Ukraine is losing parts of its territory. So Ukraine is fulfilling its part, so we are withdrawing our heavy weapons and everything. But the separatists, they do not do this, and they are kind of continuing, and then again in a next fight, and then again we make Minsk 3, Minsk 4, and Ukraine is kind of coming back. So, but imagine if you have a land corridor connecting Russia with Crimea, which gives the Platzdarm for going elsewhere. And that should be a very worrying sign, not for Ukraine itself, but also for the Europe, how far this can go. So, my point is that the war can be and should be stopped, but it needs more active role of international and European community, and more understanding that Ukrainian war is not a local conflict. It includes at least three layers. Inside of the country, bilateral Ukraine-Russia, regional as well, but it also involves international level, because it disturbs and destroys the whole system of international security. So that's the problem. That is the problem, and this issue should be dealt globally. And we do understand how hard it is, and we do definitely appreciate how much EU has committed itself into involvement in solving this problem. We do understand how it is difficult to reach this compromise of 28 members to put on sanctions against Russia. And we do understand the hope of the European Union and European member states to stop the war with economic means. Nobody wants to continue war. Nobody wants to be involved and that their people are being killed. This is clear. And we do understand the logics which stands behind the European capitals and European Union itself. But the problem is that the other side sees this differently. And the question and the kind of division line lies is what price are you ready to pay? And it seems this is inequivalent. And it's very clear, because it comes from the nature of the systems you have here, where the life of person means something, and another system where life doesn't really cost so much, so that you can try, you can invest, let's say, with the human resources. So that's the issue. In terms of how I hope, we all do hope, that this would be enough economic means to stop actual conventional war. But let's imagine it is not enough. Let's imagine that sanctions are not, they are hurting economy, but they have still enough resources to continue. One of the experts, he said that now West is focusing on weakening Russia. The logics behind, as we understand it, that yes, we do understand that Russia may continue. But parallel to this, we will make efforts to weaken its kind of power and to reduce their resources. And then now, in these terms, we have kind of a fight of time. Who comes first, The lack of resources in the regime of Putin, or pressure from the West. And of course, this is inevitable when these come together, But the problem is that, because I'm Ukrainian, so I'm speaking from the interest of Ukraine. Before all these beautiful processes come together, Ukraine may lose half of its territory and half of its population, and that will continue. So that's the problem, and that's why one of the experts, he said that probably instead of trying to weaken in Russia, EU should more concentrate, and the West should more concentrate on helping Ukraine. In which terms it's the West to decide. So that's what I'm saying. So, and that's the logic. So maybe you should compensate not only weakening, sanctioning Russia and so on, but also to provide more assistance to Ukraine. Regarding the military assistance, nonetheless, how we want to avoid it. But again, I may repeat, it may be some moments when we all come to this point that you have to decide. Because then if you allow to continue this creepy occupation, then it may be really strong negative consequences for the EU itself. And it's better to fight here on your external borders and not to wait when it comes too close, when you have to pay much bigger price. It's out again, since it is in the hands of the national governments, it's up to them to decide. It's up to them to consult the citizens inside of the EU how to deal with this. But I would say again, do not estimate and do not take conflict in Ukraine as an external matter for the EU. Take it as an internal matter, because it concerns our common security system, which has been destroyed. Budapest Memorandum, where Ukraine has given up its nuclear weapon in return to guarantee for its security, has been broken. So nobody is secured. And Baltic states do understand this. Poland is understanding this. Also several Eastern countries, they do understand, because they still have this memory, history memory, you know, what can happen. And yes, so we do understand that NATO is being now kind of forced in itself, but would it be sufficient? Ask Baltic states, ask Poland. Are they sure that they are protected well? Thank you. Civil society today, those who have been active in that time, now they are still active. It's just they use their force and kind of energy in another direction. And first of all, it's volunteer work to help Ukraine to fight in the war in the eastern Ukraine, but also to help internally displaced people, those who went out of this, let's call them disturbed regions of the war, and made it to come to the mainland Ukraine. This is where now civil society is very active. It's very active. Second direction of where civil society is also very active is trying and efforts to control the government, the public sector. And this is what because I've been traveling last year, I've been traveling a lot through Ukraine, and I made a kind of a circle. And what I see on this in Kiev, those who are, as we call them, think tanks, they're trying to control and also to provide ideas for the central governance, to the president, to the Verkhovna, to our parliament, to the government, and so on. On the regional level, I see in each city which I visited, they kind of enforce their efforts to control their regional authorities. This is another story, whether they are successful or not, and how successful they are. But the effect and this attempt, they say it for themselves. So civil society is active, civil society is awakened and making and choosing the direction they can change things. But the speed of reforms is low. And Ukraine could have done more, But they also say that the last half of the year has been done more than in the previous half of the year. So the reforms are moving, they are not moving so fast as we want, as fast as we want. And that's again the role of civil society to push for this. And also its role for the international community and European Union in particular to push for and to press our government to do more. The government says that we cannot undertake a lot of reforms in times of war. And we do understand it, but we also say that you cannot use war as an excuse of not doing anything, right? So that's the point. So how do we explain why we are not moving as fast as we want in terms of reform? Partly it's the consequences of probably unprofessionalism, partly of internal fight which is still going on in the governmental system, partly resistance, because corruption still exists in the country. The public sector is still affected by corruption, so there is a huge, and also those who have been elected, they say that this is a huge resistance to reforms inside of the public sector system. So those who have to reform, they resist it. But again, nothing new on the moon. Nothing is new on the moon. Many countries have taken, and that's why crucial is role of the civil society and international community. I have a very simple answer to this. The myth about nationalist or fascist movements in Ukraine has been broken by the results of the first presidential elections and second by the parliamentary elections. The only nationalistic movements which we had in the previous Verkhovna Rada did not get into this new parliament. It was Tyagnybok and Svoboda. Freedom. So it was the only nationalists who had them. So they're out. Then their representative, he ran for presidency elections and he got only what? He got 4% of the votes. So this is the answer to all this, what they have inflamed us. But thank you for this question, because you raised a bigger question about Russian propaganda. And then, again, you remember what fascists said, real fascists in Hitler time. One of this, he said that you should convince your people that other people are not human. And then you can convince them to fight against them. Because they are not fighting against human, they are fighting against animals. This is exactly the instrument it is being used right now. They dehumanize Ukrainians as people, using all kinds of instruments. And that is why it is so easy to tell Russians to go and fight into eastern Ukraine, because you are not fighting human people whom you first consider your brotherhood's nation. You are fighting with animals. So this is the beauty of propaganda. But it has also other coin, as always, right? Because you cannot feed your own people with hate for so long. Because in one point, this hate can turn against those who have been feeding these people. This is first, and second, then exactly one, again, this is another reason why this war cannot be stopped by Russia itself. Because you cannot feed for so long people with hatred and then suddenly say, stop, no. Ukrainians are good people, now we don't fight with them anymore. So it's also issue for those who Russian propaganda is sophisticated because they are not telling the kind of totally untruths. They say half truths, half untruths, right? And this is the hardest part to fight with, but it is possible. So what everybody can do is just to check this information with alternative sources. So we are living in a free society, all the information is open, and everybody is free to choose other sources of information. Again, coming back to Donbass area, what we have learned from these people is that they are not so much defending, even this 70% of those in Donbass who are not satisfied with Ukraine, they are criticizing Ukrainian governments, but 70% of them, they want to stay in Ukraine. So actually, real separatist movements, we are talking about 15-20%. So those who are really kind of in favor of belonging to Russia kind of officially. So then belonging cultural. So yes, and Donbass people, they are not protecting Russia in Donbass. They are protecting Donbass as such. They have really strong regional identity. So they want to, so that most of them, as we understand it, the ones that either Russia and Ukraine get out of these regions, and we have our sovereignty or whatever, I don't know what's, I mean, not in terms of legal terms, but in terms that give us power to solve our own issues. How civil society is solving this? What can people do? You can only talk to other people, showing that you are an enemy, not an enemy to them. And this, yesterday it was announced by our Prime Minister that we have inside of Ukraine, we have 1 million internally displaced people from Donbass and from Crimea who came to mainland. And this is the best solution we have, so that in personal contacts people understand that we share much more than we have in division. In terms of Cold War, I mean, I think it's not a Cold War anymore, it's a warm war. But I would answer from different perspective. What Russia is doing in Ukraine is of course disturbing for Ukraine, but it's also devastating for Russia itself. And many compare what is happening now to what USSR, the Soviet Union, has done in Afghanistan. When they invaded Afghanistan, and in 10 years the USSR has fallen. Because the war was devastating for the regime inside. So yes, there are some comparison with the Cold War, but it's in the mechanism. But we are living in a different world. And first, I don't believe in this kind of bilateral conflicts anymore, because so many players, different players, are being now involved. And this is not, two countries cannot decide destiny of the whole of the whole world anymore. So, even if there are some comparison to the Cold War, the situation is different. Because players are different, times are different, methodology is different, everything is different. And we may not have this Cold War for so many years. So let's solve this issue together, I mean, in Ukraine. Yeah, I mean, I cannot agree with you more. I totally share your points. But this is, again, we are coming back to this, remember we were mentioning this race with time. Who will be the first? It's either Russia, Putin, who takes half of Ukraine, or its sanctions and economic devastation will play. So this is where we are, the paradigm. So this is, and you are right from the point of view of Western world. So when kind of you cannot continue if you don't have resources and if your population does not support you and so on and so on. But to understand the logics, just please try to see this situation through the Putin's eyes. He needs this war to keep his power inside of Russia. So that's the real mean, because he has no money are being thrown away from the country, so he needs this excitement, so that people do not start asking questions. Why our salary are so low, why we don't like what surrounds us, and so on and so on. He shows them the picture that we are still a great nation, everybody is afraid of us. So but again, in the long term he will lose. In the long term everything will happen as you said, but in the long term. But what happens now? This is really very tricky, because federalism is used by Russians. We do not use term federalism, we use term decentralization. Decentralization meaning giving more power to the local level. And again, here I should blame the Ukrainian government for decades. These talks have been lasted for decades, that we have to give more and more power to the regions. They didn't do this. Why? It's always a question of money. Because if you give more authorities, you have to give also authorities in budget distribution. It means that money should stay on the local level and not collected in the center. So, we have to go, and civil society and experts community was always in favor of decentralization. So far, yes, but maybe not as active as we wanted them. But as I mentioned before, the mood in the US is also being changed. And if you know, there are some reports now being released by some thinkers of the US who say and definitely state that Ukraine should be supplied with weapons to protect itself. And so this is the mood. Whether they are taken or not, it's up to Obama to take this decision, because it's, again, I mean, according to their rules, the mood is changing. They are definitely stand together with the EU on sanctioning Russia, and as we understand, they are really kind of pushing also, and together with the EU states, to exceed the sanctions if Russia is not fulfilling. We would like US to be more involved into this conflict, but we do understand they cannot play prominent role in each and every conflict which is happening on the planet. And yes, so we will advocate for more active involvement, for more efforts, and for taking it more and more serious, the conflict. Every authoritarian regime does the same thing. External intervention combined with internal suppress of freedom in the country. And then it all leads to the collapse of the system. But this is the classics of authoritarian regimes. From outside, you never know when it will collapse. You just know that it will collapse. But it can be kind of a simple push, and the whole system destroys. But I have quite positive feelings about the future of Ukraine, because this is what we discussed before this interview, this meeting. That, you know, this war is against all devastating role of the war for the society, but against all these backgrounds, actually the nation is being built. And if you track back to history of many of the European nations, this is how it is done. This is the point to identifying yourself and defining yourself. Are you fighting for what? Who you are? For being belonging to this nation? Or what is are you fighting or not? And this is a personal choice. And if your friend, she takes this choice that she's not gonna take part in it, that's her personal choice. The only thing I can say is just living abroad is hard. You have to have feeling of belonging to someone in somewhat, so that you share some roots and story. How broad it is, I don't know. I mean, these stories about, no, I will leave the country, it was always in Ukraine, but then many of them, they came back. Or, because as we discussed, diaspora is very active now in Brussels here, and it means that people never lost their connection to their homelands. And we want to help, and we do everything what connects these two worlds. So the future of Ukraine is bright. We will win because we are fighting for what we believe. So we are not fighting for something which belongs to someone else. We are defending the lands. We are defending our values. We are defending of who we are. We are fighting for our future. The history of humanity always have developed itself through the conflicts, unfortunately through the wars, but each time it made us stronger, it made us better, and what is much more important, the space of freedom has been spreading up. This time it's Ukraine to fight for its freedom, and I'm addressing you, your society, to be more active in supporting Ukraine, because supporting Ukraine, you are supporting fight for freedom. This is all about. Be with us, be interested, seek for information, seek for alternative points of view, speak up loudly what you think, and support people. And also push for your local governance to be more proactive. Thank you again. Thank you very much. I enjoyed it a lot, and I would also very much thank to Dirk, to Ria, and of course to Matthias for giving us this floor, for being here with us, and yes, thank you.